a lot of time over the last few lessons learning how to name various types of ionic compounds. So compounds where there always is a metal transferring electrons to nonmetals. Now we need to look at naming molecular compounds, or also known as covalent compounds. So this is the title of your note, naming molecular covalent compounds. So our molecular compounds are compounds that are made up of only nonmetals. Because there's only nonmetals, there's no transferring of electrons. Instead, our atoms share electrons to fill their valence shells. And when they do this, they form what's called a covalent bond. So for example, if we look at H2, a compound where we have two hydrogen atoms, both of our hydrogen atoms have one valence electron. Now I know this isn't the way that we normally draw our Lewis dot diagrams, but it makes sense to show that these two hydrogens have these two valence electrons, or one valence electron each, and they join together to form a covalent bond. So make sure you have this copied down before we move on. When we name molecular compounds, we use a prefix to indicate the number of atoms of each element in the molecule. So taking a look, if we have one atom of an element, we use the prefix mono. If we have two, we use di. If we have three, we use tri. If we have four, we use tetra. 5, penta. 6, hexa. 7, hepta. 8, octa. 9, nano. And 10, deca. These prefixes are exactly the same as the ones used for hydrates. Because you're going to be using these prefixes quite often, it's best if you have them memorized. Before we look at some rules using our prefixes, make sure you have this copied down. To name molecular compounds properly, you have to be familiar with 4 different rules. The first one is if there's only one of the first atom, don't use a prefix. So if there's only one of the first atom, don't use a prefix. So for example, if we have carbon dioxide, CO2, it gets the name carbon dioxide. There's only one carbon here, so there's no prefix. Our second rule is that if there is only one of the second atom, then you use the prefix. So, for example, if you have NO, the name is nitrogen monoxide. We have an invisible 1 indicating we have one oxygen, so we use the prefix for the oxygen, mono. Our third rule is that usually we don't have any double vowels. So for example, if we wanted to write the word monoxide, like in our previous example, if you just added the prefix to oxide, you end up with something like this. This is wrong. Instead, you get rid of one of those O's and you write it oxide, so that there's only one oxygen here. However, if you have two different vowels, like if you were to write dioxide, that is okay. When we talk about having no double vowels, we're usually indicating that we don't have two of the same vowels in a row or right beside each other. Our fourth and final rule is that we never reduce molecular compounds to lowest terms. So for example, if you have N2O2, you never turn it into NO. This is because an ionic compound formula is showing the ratio of atoms that are bonded together, whereas in a molecular compound formula, it's showing you how many are actually bonded together in a compound. And this doesn't make sense right now, but it will a little bit later into our unit. The important thing to remember is that you never, ever reduce molecular compounds. So if we quickly look at some examples, if we look at our name, we can very easily figure out the formula. In our first example, we have sulfur trioxide. So sulfur tells us we have a sulfur. Oxide tells us we have an oxygen. And our tri tells us that there's 3 oxygens. Just take a look and see that for all of our molecular compounds, they all still have the ending IDE. Okay, so the last or the second nonmetal in the compound gets the ending IDE. Maybe we'll write that in. Second. Okay, so this is just like the ionic compounds. In our next example, we have phosphorus. Tells us we have phosphorus. The di tells us that we have 2 of them. The chloride tells us we have Cl. And the tri tells us that there's 3. And in our third example, we have sulfur again. Notice there's no mono there because we don't write a prefix if there's only one of the first element. We have fluoride telling us that we have fluoride. And we have hexa to tell us that we have 6 fluorides. Okay, now look at some naming of molecular compounds using the formula. Works the same way. We have N, so we know we have a nitrogen. We have a 2, which tells us that it's dinitrogen. We have an O, which tells us it's oxygen. We already talked about that ending, IDE. And we have an invisible 1 here, so we know it's monoxide. Okay, so N2O, dinitrogen monoxide. Next example down, we have Br. No subscript here, so there's only 1 bromine. First element does not get a prefix, so we have bromine. And then I here tells us that we have iodine, but its ending gets turned into IDE. And because there's an invisible 1, it becomes monoiodide. And actually, because this isn't the first letter in the word, it should actually be a small I. Okay, so we have bromine monoiodide. Our last example down here, we have xenon. An invisible one here means mono, but we don't write it in because it's the first atom. We have an F here, so we have fluorine. Oh, I need more space for that. And because it's a 4, we get a tetra. And I made another mistake. This should be fluoride. Okay, so make sure we get this down before we look at our last piece for naming molecular compounds. So the last little trick to naming molecular compounds is that we have things called diatomic elements. And these are elements that exist naturally as a pair. So to name them, we have to write the element's name plus the state it's found in. And these guys down here in this chart are the diatomics that you need to know. So you need to have these memorized because they're going to appear again. All of them are found in the gas state of room temperature, except for bromine, which is a liquid. So if you come across any of these 7 diatomics, you need to name them with the name and the state it's found in. So H2, hydrogen gas, O2, oxygen gas, nitrogen gas, fluorine gas, chlorine gas, iodine gas, and bromine liquid. Okay, so that's the end of our lesson on naming molecular compounds. Make sure you have this copied down. And if you wanted to get ahead, you could be trying out your practice, or which will be your homework, on page 98, number 22, and number 23. And by homework, I mean what you'll be expected to be working on in class after doing this lesson. Okay, see you tomorrow. Have a good day.